Sometimes, like Daniel, we need to confess and intercede in prayer for others. Who's on your prayer list? Jeremiah was prophesying of the exile when Daniel was taken in the first deportation. The second deportation resulted in the deportation of the prophet Ezekiel, and the final deportation of the Israelites in Judah resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. It is the writings of Jeremiah that Daniel mentions in today's text. In this lesson, Daniel mourns the plight of his people and nation and goes to God as a prophet and intercessor on their behalf, which brings us to our key verse for today, which reads, O our God, hear your servant's prayer. Listen as I plead. For your own sake, Lord, smile again on your desolate sanctuary. Daniel chapter 9, verse 17. It was as a prophet that Daniel interceded in prayer for the Hebrew people. By setting his face unto the Lord, Daniel was determined to go to the only source of help. Despite his work in the powerful government of King Darius and his history of service to the thrones of the Babylonian and Persian empires, Daniel knew that only God could offer deliverance for his people. Daniel had been faithful in serving God, and God had delivered him during life-threatening circumstances. Yet Daniel did not approach God with haughtiness or even familiarity. He sought God through prayer and supplication as he donned humility by placing himself in sackcloth and ashes as he prayed. Daniel knew that it was only through prayer and supplication that God could be asked to intervene. Daniel's prayer was not a simple statement of, "Sorry, Lord, I did it." Daniel poured out his heart before God. He first acknowledged the right of God to exact punishment for the sins committed against him. Then he confessed for himself and his people. This righteous man acknowledged his own need for God's forgiveness for his transgressions of God's laws. Daniel acknowledged that the sin of his people was his sin. He did not attempt to say that the deeds prophesied by Jeremiah were committed by a previous generation. He did not put himself above other Hebrews by reminding God of how he personally had been faithful all the days of his captivity. He had refused the king's food, denied the unjust laws for forbidding prayer, and faced the lion's den. But Daniel knew that those things showed God's power, not his own determination. God had delivered, and Daniel was humbled by God's mercy. Daniel addressed God as Adonai and said, "the great and dreadful." In Hebrew, great is gadol, which means large in magnitude and extent. With this word, Daniel admitted that the God of Judah is larger than Judah. God's power and majesty extend far beyond the boundaries of the holy city Jerusalem. There, in Persia, in the capital city of a foreign land, the power of God was felt. In addition, Daniel confessed God as a covenant keeper and giver of mercy. Through their entire period of sin and judgment, God had never failed his people. Despite their so often forgetting God, he had never forgotten them. God had interceded on behalf of those who kept his commandments. Daniel's own life had shown that God was faithful. As Daniel tried to serve God faithfully in a strange land, he found that God was present. And Daniel wasn't alone in this. The Hebrew young men who had been thrown into the furnace were witnesses as well. But Daniel's confession of God's merciful grace goes beyond even those few. God's faithfulness had been shown to their fathers, from Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Jacob. Through the judges and the prophets, God had been faithful. Daniel admitted to God that God was right in his punishment of Israel. Daniel then asked God to restore his holy temple in Jerusalem, God's sacred place, so that all people would know his name and his power. Finally, Daniel, in making intercession for the Israelites and the nation, begged God to forgive the people and the nation. So here's our lesson. Daniel's prayers and supplications are marvelous examples of how we are to take our petitions to God. We must not go blaming God or others. We must come before God acknowledging our own sins and asking him for forgiveness, because the failure is not in God, but in us. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to iLights. Heavenly Father, fill our hearts with what we truly desire, for who we truly seek is you.